Hey folks, y'all ready to get started? Yeah, thank you for sticking it out through a very long day for this session. I'm always really excited to talk about Visual Studio. My name's Amanda Silver. I'm the Director of Program Management for the Visual Studio family. And I work on Visual Studio Code, TypeScript, a whole bunch of other things. I'm honored to be joined today by the technical lead for SeeingAI, Saqib Sheikh, and the PM lead for the core of Visual Studio, Anthony Cangialosi, who will be coming up a little bit later to do some demos with me. We have a lot of passionate people back in Redmond who have a very deep commitment to developer productivity. They're constantly trying to figure out how to make your life better as a developer, to shave off every second in your inner loop. And I'm really humbled to be representing the team today and to be working to make Microsoft's developer tools better for you guys. Now, our mission with Visual Studio is to provide the best-in-class tools that can be used by any developer. Over the past few years, Visual Studio has come to mean so much more than just an IDE. The core of our vision is any developer, any app, on any platform. And so we've really expanded the product family quite a bit over the past few years to match that vision. We now have an IDE for both the PC and Mac dev machines. And those IDEs enable developers to develop for any platform that you would want to develop for, mobile, cloud, web, desktop. And one of the reasons why we chose to kind of highlight the SeeingAI application today is because it really does a lot of those things. It's actually a mobile application that will soon be a cross-platform mobile application that actually connects to the cloud and uses a lot of the cloud for the smarts in the app itself. And with developer services like Azure DevOps and Visual Studio App Center to complement the IDEs, that accelerates the full application development lifecycle. And now it's complemented by the world's premier platform for developer collaboration, GitHub. So altogether, we really think we have a pretty compelling developer platform for you guys to use. Now, the momentum we've seen with the Visual Studio family over the past few years has been absolutely phenomenal. We have over 15 million monthly active developers using one of Visual Studio family of products. So you guys are in good company when you use Visual Studio and the Visual Studio family. Now, digging a little bit deeper, we have about 8.5 million monthly active users for Visual Studio on Windows and about 7.2 million for VS Code. But you don't have to take our word for it. The Stack Overflow 2019 Dev Survey showed that Visual Studio Code was the favorite code editor by 50.7% of the population. And that kind of makes sense because Visual Studio Code is really fantastic at JavaScript development. And a lot of devs do JavaScript development at least some of the time. And Visual Studio was the favorite amongst 31.5% of the population. So together, that also makes sense because Visual Studio is also popular with developers using Python. Visual Studio Code is popular with developers using Python, Node.js, whereas Visual Studio is really best. A lot of developers love it who are coming from a C# and a C++ background. The survey also cited that .NET Core is one of the most loved frameworks and that Visual Studio is the most frequently used IDE. And both C# and TypeScript actually made it amongst the top 10 programming languages that are the most loved. We've also been contributing pretty significantly to open source. So as you can see, Microsoft has been the top most contributing organization to open source over the past couple of years, as in the GitHub Octaverse survey. And VS Code actually has the most number of contributors by the community overall of any project that's hosted on GitHub. And the Azure Docs is one of the fastest growing projects. So part of how we build this momentum is by having a really rapid release cadence that introduces new features and functionality in Visual Studio while maintaining backwards compatibility. We've really made it possible for you guys to survey the next major version of Visual Studio while you're still using the current Visual Studio side by side, and then to have a no-brainer upgrade to basically adopt the latest version. The technology base of Visual Studio, along with the automation and the adoption of our modern DevOps practices, has actually vastly improved the agility of our team. So, for instance, a couple of years ago, it took probably about 6 weeks for us to get a new release out the door. Once we did the final fix, it took us 6 weeks to actually validate that. Now we can actually validate a new version of Visual Studio in a few hours and get it published in about 2 to 3 hours. Meanwhile, the reliability of Visual Studio has also been improving. So we're now at below a 1% crash rate, which is pretty awesome. And it's easier than ever as a result of this architecture and these modern DevOps practices to be able to support new updates to Visual Studio that let you guys target Azure, iOS, Android, Windows, .NET Core. Let all of those platforms version independently while still allowing the Visual Studio tools to keep up and allow you guys to target those platforms. So with Visual Studio, we really want you guys to be able to code faster, work smarter, and obviously create whatever you're passionate about creating. So what I want to do now is get started with Visual Studio 2019. Before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of an intro to the application that we'll be talking about here today. So the SeeingAI application, we really wanted to showcase Visual Studio 2019 through the lens of a real application. And this is something that Microsoft ships. It's a free application that's used by users throughout the world. And it's designed for the low vision community to allow them to harness the power of AI to describe the people, the text, the objects that are around them. And it will narrate the world around you. So let me show you a little bit about it. Oops. Okay, let's go back. Here we go. Back one more. There we go.
SeeingAI is a Microsoft research project for people with visual impairments. The app narrates the world around you by turning the visual world into an audible experience. Point your phone's camera, select a channel, and hear a description. The app recognizes saved friends.
Jenny near top right, 3 feet away.
Describes the people around you, including their emotions.
28-year-old female wearing glasses looking happy.
It reads text out loud as it comes into view, like on an envelope.
Ken Lawrence, P.O. Box.
Or a room entrance.
Conference 2005.
Or scan and read documents like books and letters. The app will guide you and recognize the text with its formatting.
Top and left edge is not visible. Hold steady. Lease agreement. This agreement
When paying with cash, the app identifies currency bills.
$20 US.
When looking for something in your pantry or at the store, use the barcode scanner with audio cues to help you find what you want.
Campbell's tomato soup.
When available, hear additional product details.
Heated microwave bowl on height.
And even hear descriptions of images in other apps like Twitter by importing them into SeeingAI.
A close-up of Bill Gates.
Finally, explore our experimental features like scene descriptions to get a glimpse of the future.
I think it's a young girl throwing a frisbee in the park.
Experience the world around you with the SeeingAI app from Microsoft.
So it's a pretty awesome application. It's used throughout the world, as I mentioned, and it allows users to see their friends, recognize their friends, and interpret their facial expressions. It allows you to look at images that are on your phone and understand kind of what's in those images. It can do product identification, as you saw. It has a 4.6 rating on the App Store, which is not easy to achieve. So this is a pretty high-quality application, and we're lucky to have 2 of the developers here to talk to us about how they built it. And it's built with Visual Studio 2019. So next I want to show you guys how you might get started actually contributing to this application. So let me just jump over to my dev machine. Okay, I am number, let's see, 566. Can you guys see that? Great. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just bring up Visual Studio, the new Visual Studio. So what you can see here is the new splash screen, so you know it's getting started. Now, what you see here next is the start window. The start window is intended to kind of come up really quickly, faster than the rest of Visual Studio is loading. And what you can see here is we really want you guys to get to the code that you care about as quickly as you possibly can. And so you can see that we have the open recent. We have all your most recent projects that were being used. You can clone or check out code. So you can see we can browse repositories from Azure DevOps or GitHub, and more source code repositories are coming shortly into this window. Or you can create a new project. Now, one of the things that we had heard from new users, maybe new developers on your team, is that in the old Create New Project window with all those tree views, it was actually hard to kind of figure out what the tool was really capable of. And so what's cool about this is I can just go in here and search for Android, and I can see, for example, all of the templates that allow me to do Android. Further, I can look at all of the languages that are available. Even if I haven't installed the workloads that are associated with these languages, same goes for the platform types, for example. Even if I haven't necessarily installed all of the workloads, I can actually see what Visual Studio is capable of building, and then it'll actually bring you back to the installer so you can know that you want to install another workload to be able to do that. So that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to go back here, and I'm going to open the SeeingAI solution right here. So now what you can see is, this will load in just a second. Let me move this real quick. In the Solution Explorer, you can actually see all of the application that we just talked about. And I'll invite Saqib up a little bit later to talk about the architecture of the application itself. But what you might notice at first glance of Visual Studio 2019 is, first of all, that it just looks a little bit more streamlined. It's kind of lighter on the eyes. We wanted it to have a little less visual density in the product so that you guys can really focus on the code that you want to focus on. The other thing that you'll see is that we've condensed the menus up here so that there's more screen real estate for your code, what you guys really care about. You might also notice that, for example, the active tabs are a little bit more prominent. So let's say I opened up an additional file, you could see that the string engine test is the fact that that's an active tab is the color pops a little bit more. And then lastly, you'll notice that we've done some consolidation of the top-level menu items. So you can see that we've taken all of the extensions and we now kind of put them under this extensions menu so that you can manage all of your extensions in one place and all of the menus that come from extensions in one place. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you guys, you'll notice that I'm signed out here. And so I'm just going to go to Alt F5 and go to the account settings, and you'll see I'm signed out. So now the next thing that we've done recently is single sign-on. So what I can do now is connect to the Azure account, and hopefully this will work, and go ahead and connect. And now I can close this, and you can see that the PowerShell is now completing the sign-in. And if we go back, and that successfully worked, if we go back here, you'll see that it will update my Visual Studio to actually sign in based on the single sign-on that I have done through PowerShell, which is great. So now I can just go ahead and close this, and I can go to, for example, the Cloud Explorer, and I can see all of the resources that are available to me based on my Azure subscription identity that I signed in with. This will take just a second to connect to Azure, and then we should see it. There you go. So now you guys can see all of my Azure subscriptions. Please don't try to hack me. Thank you. All right. The other thing that I'm going to show you guys, we've been really, really working on performance, and I'll talk a little bit about performance a little bit later. But if I go down here and I do something like unload, if I unload the UI projects here, just unload that project, I can go back to the top of the solution file, and I can go ahead and save it as a solution filter. And the result of that is it's going to basically save that solution file as a filter so that I can load that solution up again. I still have that project loaded in the main repository, so everybody knows that that's what you need to actually build. But for my inner loop, because I'm not churning that code, and that's kind of not it's a leaf dependency, not a mainline dependency, I don't necessarily need to load it in my mainline Visual Studio. So that really improves performance. Now, the other thing that you probably saw is that we moved the search menu and made that a little bit more prominent. Now, what we were really trying to focus on is to make sure that the discoverability in the product is much improved. We have a ton of features that you guys request that are actually already in the product. It's just that you can't necessarily find them. And so with the improved search, you can actually find them now. So for example, if I wanted to look up the Test Explorer, oops, that is a small bug right now in this preview version. If I want to look for the Test Explorer, I can just do that, and I can click Enter, and I can actually take the action immediately to bring up the Test Explorer. So let's just pin that right now. And then I can go ahead and look for example, live unit testing. And you'll see that Start pops to the top. I can just hit Enter, and that'll actually start the live unit testing running, which is pretty cool. Further, not only is it commands that are in Visual Studio, but I can also do things like look for extensions. So I'm looking for the pull request extension, as you see here. And this has a list of all of the matches that are there. But I can also go to the extensions here, and I will just see the pull request extension for Visual Studio. So I know exactly what I'm looking for. Now, one of the features that's coming up in a release of Visual Studio, a point release soon coming to you, is code search. So if you see I search for string eng, you can actually see that I can see string engine, all of the files that match, but even further, it has semantic search. So I could actually search for a class name, for example, and double click on that, and I will navigate directly to the class name, which is pretty cool. So, so with that, next what I want to show you guys are some code styles. So I'm just going to do a Control Q again to search. And now I'm going to search for code style to bring up that feature and look for code styles in C#. Now, this really allows me to make sure that my code base is conforming to, that all of the users that are developing against my code base are conforming to the same style guidelines. So what I can do here is just go down and select, for example, var preferences and set that to a warning. And I could choose this one and set that to a warning. Prefer braces, and then I can generate an editor config file from settings. Now, if I generate it from here, then that's generating the editor config based on my preferences, what I've set here. The other thing you could do is actually have an editor config be generated based on IntelliCode. And what that's going to do is going to infer, based on the styles of the code styles that you've already written, what the editor config should say. So I'm just going to generate that right now, and just call it editor config, and click OK. And now what you can see is it's first of all running the live unit tests again, but where there used to be nothing in the bottom here, you can now see that I have 12 warnings that are in the bottom based on those code styles warnings. So further, I can go back to the code editor, and we now have this code cleanup capability. I can go ahead and configure the code cleanup, and I can apply the implicit and explicit type settings fixer into my code cleanup just by selecting this rule and then just clicking the up arrow, and now it's going to be applied. So what I can do now is I can come back here and I can click this little broom thing that'll apply those code cleanup rules to the code styles in the code that I'm working on right now. And you can see that this will apply fixes throughout the entirety of the file. Now, not only that, but I can also go and do that to the entire solution. So for example, I can go right-click, and I can go to Analyze and Code Cleanup, and then I can run code cleanup on the entire solution. Now, this is super quickly running through all of the files, and it's applying all of those rules in line. So now we have 38 different points of edit in this solution. So if I brought this up, you can see all of the files that were impacted by that code cleanup that I had just applied. Now, obviously, it's not the nicest thing to do to come and be a new dev on the team for the first day and apply new code styles. So one other really cool feature that we've added to Visual Studio is the ability, and this is a highly requested feature, is the ability to automatically create a Git stash. So what you can see here is I can go back up here. I can say stash all. and this will save all of those, and then it'll just create a stash, and then it'll bring me back to 0 edits, as you see down below. But that's now stashed. I could come back to it later if I want to apply it, which is pretty cool. Okay, next what I want to show you guys is IntelliCode. So IntelliCode is our AI-assisted intelligence that can be applied to many, many things, but one of the most important things is Intellisense, or code completion. So what I can do here is just go search again for IntelliCode in the Control Q search box at the top of Visual Studio and click Create New Model. Now what that's going to do is it's actually going to analyze your code. And what it's doing here is it's not uploading your code into our server. What it's doing is it's extracting metadata, the metadata information that we need to create a machine learning model over your code so that we can provide a customized Intellisense guidance to all of the developers on your team. Now this will take just a second to actually train this in Azure and then to update the code patterns and basically create a model and then push the model locally. And what's interesting about this is actually very similar to the type of machine learning that actually happens in the SeeingAI application. Basically what happens is they have many things that you train, it goes up into their servers, and then they create a model in Azure, and then they push that model to basically execute performantly on the local device. So now that I have a model, I could share that model with other developers on my team. I could retrain if there's a massive amount of code churn that has happened, or I can just go ahead and use it. So now what I'm going to do is go in and change some code. So if we go to the end of this string engine file, this is basically looking for happy face emoticons, and so I can just do a Control-Shift / to uncomment that, or a Control-Shift to recomment, or back and forth, which is pretty cool. Now what you can see is if I type value dot, and this will take just a minute to pop up, you can see that we actually get the IntelliCode completions, which are recommending the completion list for the code that's not just based on the API that I'm using, but also based on the code that I've written thus far in this project. So it's actually doing the equivalent of like a join between the machine learning model and the code that I've already written. Just to prove that to you, remember that the top completion list here is that char Levenstein similarity, which I guess is pretty popular. But if I change the code and I did something like a not if value in the context of a value, it actually changes the completion list. Because if I'm in an if, then I'm probably doing a conditional statement. And if it's a conditional expression, then basically I probably want a different set of code to be written. So next, what I'm going to do is just do contains, and then you can see that not only do we have it in the dot completion, but we also have it for parameter lists. So now you can see that it has, it's selecting the topmost overload for me, and I'm just going to click positive face, and then I'm going to complete this with just a continue. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom and do counter faces ++, enter. There we go. So that now does the search that I'm expecting it to do to actually look for the emojis. But as you can see, based on live unit testing, if you look at the left-hand side, you can see that all of these things have these little bars. That's basically an indicator to me and to you that this code that's been written has no tests against it. So that's a no-no on my team, as you guys might have heard this morning, and we need to write some unit tests. So now what I can do is go to the string engine tests, and I can go ahead to the bottom of that as well. And just to save you guys my Doogie Howser moments, I will do a Control-Shift to basically uncomment this again. So now you can see that we actually have the unit tests there, and if I do a Control-Tab, and go back to the string engine tests, you can see that immediately my live unit testing is updated, so I can actually see that those tests are now executing the code that I just wrote. So that's pretty cool. Now the next thing that I want to show you guys are some refactorings that are incorporated into the Solution Explorer. So I can just go ahead and do a Control-S to go to the Solution Explorer, and I'm going to go down to the bottom here, and I'm going to take the string engine tests and just basically move it into its own folder. So I can go ahead and add, and I'll add a new folder, and we'll just call it string engine, and I will move this string engine tests inside that. Now, Visual Studio is now smart enough to pick up what's happening in the file system for the purposes of refactoring. So if I come back up here, and I go to the top here, you can see this namespace. If I do, you can see there's that little screwdriver there. If I select that, you can see that it now has picked up the fact that it's moved folders, and now it's in the string engine folder, and I can just go ahead and apply that string folder there. So that's pretty cool too. So now what I want to do is just go down and create yet another method, another unit test to exercise the code that I just wrote. So I'm going to just select this. Let me select it with the attribute. And I'm going to do a Control-D to create another instance of it, basically just to duplicate it. And obviously I get an error immediately saying that this is already duplicated code, so I can just go multiple. And then what I'm going to do is just add in another test for extra emoji messages, right? And so I don't know if you guys know, but a cool thing about Windows 10 is you can hit the Windows dot key to bring up all the emoji completions. And I really like the little heart face guy, so we'll do that. And I'll just close this. And now we can see that that's added. And then if I change this, we can see that based on live unit testing, I know that I'm now failing my test. So I need to go figure out how do I update the original code to be able to pass this test. So what I can do is a Control-RT to actually run this. And let me just hit a breakpoint there so that once we start debugging, we will actually see the folder here. I mean, the code that we're executing here. So now that we're in this context, let me just step in a couple of lines and go ahead. So one other really cool feature that we've added in Visual Studio 2019 is the ability to search in the debug windows. So now I'm at this for each, and I have this positive faces thing. I want to see if the positive faces contains the emoji that I'm looking for. So I could bring up the Control dot again and search for this smiley face, and close that, and search, and we can actually see. It's not only searching on the members that are in my class at execution time, it's also looking at the values. And if I had searched for the heart face, we would see that it's not there. So let's just try that. One dot, and we search for heart, and if I hit enter again, it'll go again, but we can see that it's not there. So, so basically the problem is that the positive faces collection does not have that additional emoji in it. So I can go ahead and stop right here, and I'm going to go to definition for positive faces, and I can just see here that it doesn't have the face positive heart thing. So I can do face positive with that completion list and look for heart eyes, and then a toString to complete that, and that's great. And then I can go back to this string engine tests, and we can see that we're now fortunately passing the unit tests that we had just written, and so therefore we fixed the method that we were just working on. So that was a really, really quick way for me to kind of get oriented, to learn the code styles, to apply the code styles, to basically start coding, and have feedback from the unit tests as I'm starting to get oriented in the project. So now that I've done this and I've changed this code, I might want to invite somebody to come and check out this code. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite Saqib Sheikh, who is the tech lead for the SeeingAI application, to come up and review my code. So you guys will probably hear, as he comes up, you'll hear his machine talk to him, because that's how he interfaces with the machine. So it's Windows Hello is recognizing him. Hey, Sakib. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite him to a live share session. So what I can do is just go ahead up to this live share session right here and get a link to share it to him. And this is going to just give me something on my clipboard. I'm just copying that again just in case. And I can go ahead. You can see that we've been rehearsing a little bit. And I can just go ahead and send that to him.
Cool. So let me see if I get your message.
Yep.
I do, except do we have audio?
Yeah, do we? Are we hearing the audio on Sakib's machine? Oh, do I need to switch? There we are.
There we are. Okay. Go to the bottom one.
So what you can see is that once Sakib gets the link, it's actually going to start up the link to Visual Studio Live Share. And if everything is going well, it looks like you don't have network connection, unfortunately. Let me just make sure.
What's really nice about this is that I can keep using my machine, which is set up the way I want with my screen reader and everything. Yeah, I'm still going to be able to access all the code that's just on Amanda's machine. So for me, that's one of the greatest powers for live share.
OK, so we're just fixing the network here. We're switching to a different network. Now, because we don't actually need to be on the same network, all of this is going through Azure. As long as both of us can connect to the internet, then we can basically have the same session. So I'm just going to go ahead and just re-enter. Oops, an emoji. There we go.
And we have Visual Studio opening.
Yep. So this Visual Studio instance is now, it unfortunately is in the background, but once,
There it is.
there you go.
So you wanted me to look at something?
Yeah, I wanted you to review the code that I just wrote. So if we switch back to my machine now, I'm on 6, I believe. You can actually see that up in this upper right-hand corner, I can actually see that Sakib has joined my live share session. So I can actually get an indication that he's working in here. Now, what's cool here is he can use the user interface that he's used to, which is voice narration, to basically interface with Visual Studio. So what do you think of my code?
So which method are we looking at?
We're looking at the contains happy face emoticon.
So I'm going to use the semantic search you mentioned earlier to find that. So I can just type the first letters like contains happy face emoticon.
Can you hear it okay?
Yeah, it's a bit quiet, but hey,
Can you
this way.
make it a little louder? He actually does need to hear it. Thank you.
So I'm just going to cursor down and see what your code's like. Yeah, makes sense. That's going to work actually, but it's a bit messy.
Okay.
So, okay, but that's not a problem because we can use the new refactoring features to tidy this up. So let's go up here. This if statement where you're doing the continue, if we press Control dot here, we can invert the conditional.
That looks better.
So that's already saving us a few lines of code. But you see up here, you also have that for each. We could actually use link there, and that's going to be even better.
Okay.
So that's much nicer. But it's got too many brackets. So Control dot, our best friend, and remove those parentheses, which I don't like.
Cool.
You could actually collapse this if down as well.
Yeah.
that's looking much nicer now.
Awesome. Well, as you can see there, LiveShare really allows us to collaborate in ways that really were not possible before. Even with Saqib and I, standing next to each other, he really needs to use the interface that he's used to be able to interface with technology, and we can collaborate in ways talking about the code that were really not possible. And we've heard from teams across the world that LiveShare has made it possible for them to collaborate with folks who have different types of accessibility needs. Some folks use high contrast mode, other things like that, and LiveShare really makes it possible for them to interface. So you guys have been using Visual Studio 2019 for what, a month?
Yeah, just over.
And
really
how's it go? How did it go? How was your upgrade?
The upgrade was just a non-issue. We just opened the solution and everything built like before, so that was really nice. Didn't have to spend any time on that.
That's cool. What were the first few features that you noticed about Visual Studio 2019?
I really, really like the control queue. So to be able to access all the different menu items, you just start typing and it finds it. That's probably my most favorite feature.
Cool. Anything else?
Also, the code cleanup you showed earlier. We had some new members of the team join, and there was a bit of an issue with everyone having their own code styles because they were former Java programmers. But luckily, the code cleanup came to the rescue, and we got a consistent style.
Did you notice any improvements of perf?
Yes, that was going to be my next one. How did you guess? So yeah, it's also just generally several of the operations feeling quite snappy, especially with a big solution.
Cool. And so how did you do it? Did you survey it and then the rest of your team followed?
Yes, definitely. I was the first one to install it, make sure we're not going to have any down productivity as the lead. But quickly I found that it's okay. So after a few days, the whole team moved over.
Cool. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about SeeingAI? I mean, obviously it has a tremendous amount of usage. Let me go into the slides real quick. I just want to advance because I didn't do this quite in order. But let me just go ahead and switch. I just need to go over here.
The other nice thing is even though I upgraded to Visual 2019, it's my favorite IDE, my favorite language. We have a team on mixed Visual Studio, so some people using Mac, and that just kept working really well.
And you guys used Xamarin for your application, right?
That's right. So because it's an iPhone application, it means that we could just write the code in C# the way we like it. And then we've been experimenting with what would an Android port look like. And the great thing there is we're able to share all the business logic, all the AI stuff just shares across. And it's just the UI that you have to write again. So really enjoyed that.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about first of all, why did you write SeeingAI in the first place? What got you inspired to do it?
So being blind myself, I've had an interest in AI for many years. So one day I just thought, what if we put these two things together and had a mobile app that you could point around and hear different things in your environment? And that's kind of where it started. Talked to many people. It's taken people from across Microsoft, and our customers tell it it's just as useful as I find it. So that's great.
Cool. So can you tell us a little bit about the architecture and kind of how it's authored?
So at the core, as you say, is the mobile app, which is written in Xamarin, C#. But then, of course, like most apps, mobile apps, it also relies on the cloud. So you see in this diagram, we also have an Azure app service with all the other bits of Azure, like the Key Vault and Traffic Manager hanging off that. So in app service, we have an ASP.NET Web API, and that is connected to from the phone. But then in turn, it does some of the heavy lifting itself up in the cloud, but then we have the great cognitive services which have pre-made models, so wherever appropriate, we'll call out from the Web API into cognitive services.
Cool. And so when you create the model, what happens to the model? Like, so the main app is written in C# with Xamarin. The model itself is written in.
So cognitive services is pre-made models which we just get for free. But actually, that's not always enough. So we want to process data in real time. We have a live camera preview, and we want to process 5 or 10 or 15 frames per second. And for that, we need a highly tuned machine learning model, which we make from scratch. So again, up in Azure, we have a deep learning VM with the NVIDIA GPU, where we can run all our Python scripts. And our data scientist will log in there. I'm getting him to look at the new code with remote editing as one possibility. But once you run that, there's a pipeline which generates our machine learning model, and then we can store that in any format. For example, the Onyx is really good for storing, but then to run it on the device, you want to have it in the iOS format, CoreML. So we have a Python script to convert that, and then it actually just checks it into our Git repository. And that sets off an Azure pipeline. So we have an ML branch, and as soon as the data scientist has run the script, and the script's run, and it's checked into Git, the Azure pipeline is going to start building the app, running the tests, and then it pushes it out to App Center. And that's going to actually trigger a deployment. So whenever you open the app, it's going to say, hey, there's a new version. Would you like to download it? And the great thing here is that the data scientist doesn't need to get any developer to compile the code. He doesn't need to look at the code at all in order to do his experiment and then pick up his phone and try it in the real world.
Super cool. Is there anything else we should know about SeeingAI?
Wow, there's so many little bits to this.
Yeah.
We could talk about the telemetry. So
Yeah.
I mentioned we use App Center for beta distribution, but also telemetry and analytics. And then we actually export the data from App Center into Azure App Insights. That gives us a lot more powerful tools for analyzing the data. There's a custom scripting language called Custo, which I really like, because in a text-based language, we just have all these different queries for analyzing how our users are using the app and if there are any problems. And then, in fact, we can export that to Power BI so that managers and execs, sometimes they just want to play with the UI.
Yeah, managers love their dashboards, huh?
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you, Saqib, for coming and sharing SeeingAI, building SeeingAI, sharing it with the world. Your team itself works with Visual Studio Windows?
A mix. For me, it's definitely Windows. That's my preferred platform.
And how about the other members of your team?
Other members like Eugene in the audience, he likes to use the Mac for the iOS development.
And he uses Visual Studio for Mac?
Yes, Visual Studio for Mac.
Cool. Super cool.
Ready.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will escort you to the stairs. There you go. Okay. Cool. So I'm just going to go back a couple of slides just to kind of recap a little bit of what we just saw. So some of the things that I didn't quite get to is we talked about perf. So the performance of Visual Studio has improved significantly from 2017 to 2019. Startup has been completely redesigned. It's now 1.5 times faster for a vast majority of Visual Studio users. Branch switching, so a lot of you guys switch between branches. We actually hear from a lot of our internal developers at Microsoft that they switch between branches. And so we've really made it a priority to make sure that that branch switching is much faster and can be completed in a single step. We are also continuing to improve the C++ build times, Intellisense, open folder scenarios, and one really important one is that the C++ debugger is now out of process, and so as a result, the memory usage is much, much, much lower. Obviously, we're not done yet. We continue to focus on performance and try to improve it. Now, one of the scenarios we've been working on is for the Gears of War team. I'm just going to play this video. And what you can see is that this is actually Visual Studio debugging the Gears of War application. And as you can see here, this is the memory consumption for the Visual Studio 2017 product. And you can see that it gets pretty massive there after a couple of steps going through the Gears of War application. A lot of AAA games are pretty memory intensive. Now, because this is now out of process with Visual Studio 2019, you can actually see that the memory consumption after a few minutes is really a lot less. And so previously, where we were hearing from AAA games developers and those developers that were working on large C++ code bases, that they would hit a memory an exception out of memory after a couple of minutes, they no longer are hitting that, and they can actually go on just as any other Visual Studio user for hours at a time in a debug session, which is pretty great. Now, the other scenario that you'll see, I'm just going to show you the new performance enhancements that are coming very, very soon, is the solution load. So this is our own code, the Roslyn code base, which is basically the language service that powers the Visual Studio C# user experience. And what you can see here is that the Roslyn solution is a pretty large project. It has 162 projects. Solution loads in 6 seconds, which is 2.3 times faster than Visual Studio 2017. And further than that, you can also see that we have a lot of unit tests, and they all load in about 10 seconds, which is 8 times faster than in Visual Studio 2017. So, with perf, it's never quite good enough. We continue to work on it, but we've definitely made a lot of progress over the past few months. Now, with the getting started experience, I showed you guys that the UX has been refreshed. I showed you the getting to code experience and the create new project experience. And I also showed you a little bit about Visual Studio IntelliCode, which basically allows you to code with confidence. We heard from a lot of developers who were focused on time to market that they really needed to make sure that they were able to code as quickly as possible and have the confidence that the code that they were writing was really the high quality code that they needed to ship to their users. And so we've been trying to figure out how artificial intelligence can actually help with that. And so that's part of what you saw a little bit earlier. But our aspirations are much larger. Overall, in the end, we will also have the ability to find issues that really cannot be detected through static analysis. We'll have the ability to focus your code reviews, because we hear from senior developers that code reviews take a lot of time. A lot of good testimonial on IntelliCode. A lot of people saying that it really is dramatically improving their developer experience. And IntelliCode is something that works both in Visual Studio and in Visual Studio Code. So I just showed you guys LiveShare, and we just talked through the app. And LiveShare, as you guys saw, allows us to not only use the tools that you love but have been customized to you. It allows us to do collaborative editing. As you saw, Saqib was doing the editing of the code that I was looking at using refactoring features in Visual Studio. We could share the complete context, and we could even share debug sessions. So next, what I'd like to do is show you the experience for code review. So if we jump back to this application, I'll invite Anthony up here to do this with me. If we go back to my machine, no, that's Saqib's machine. This is my machine. There we go. If I go back to the Team Explorer, you can see that I still have a couple of these changes that I've made. Now, I could go to the Team Explorer, and I could go to Home, and if I go to this, and I connect to Anthony's, if I connect to this instance, should work. Then what you'll see is that I have the ability inside of Visual Studio to actually launch a pull request. So I can go ahead and create a pull request. I can, you can see that this is a new pull request requested by me. I can assign it to members of my team, and so on. So what I'm going to show you now, what Anthony's going to show you now, is the experience to review that pull request.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're 7?
7?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start inside of a vanilla clean start of Visual Studio, and I'm not actually going to load a solution here because we wanted to make sure that it was easy for you to move in and out of context as you're kind of doing your core dev work at the same time as occasionally getting these kind of interrupt requests to review code from other members on your team. So we have this new pull request for Visual Studio extensions that you saw Amanda search for using the searching for extensions. It's an experimental extension that we have up on the Visual Studio Marketplace, and you can download it today. And what it does is it plugs in all of the features you saw for both creating pull requests inside of Visual Studio as well as reviewing them. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm connected into our team here and into our SeeingAI repository. Go ahead and connect.
Are you connected to the network?
Should be.
Looks like you are. Okay.
try double click again. Okay, there we go. So I'm connected in, but I don't have any solutions loaded here. And I could be working on another branch of this if I wanted to, but I can actually go over to the pull requests. And as you saw before in earlier versions, we did show you the list of pull requests, but it would always take you out to the web for all of that. Well, now I can actually double click on one of these pull requests and get all of that metadata and all that context about the pull request right here in the ID, kind of as you'd expect. But on top of that, I can also open it up, and I'm going to get a few more tricks in my bag now being able to do this inside of Visual Studio. Of course, now that I've opened it up, I've got a bit more of my ID kind of focused on this pull request and giving me more information. I've got the description. I can see here the discussion that we're having about that. I can certainly mark any of these resolved as we go along. I also have this pull request comments and discussions tool window at the bottom here that's giving me a summary of all of the discussion that's happening in comments throughout the different changes that Amanda's made. So if I want to navigate to one of these here, I can click on a file. And clicking on that, this should take me over to that to that change. There we go. Should have navigated me there. But if I scroll down here, I can see here that I've got some comments here in line in the margin. As I click on those, it pops those up. And I see them right where the developer might have, in this case me, happened to have put those comments. But this isn't read-only. I can actually go ahead and add my own comments. So if you right-click on any one of these lines of code, you can add a comment in here. And I can say, super job, but I like to use some markdown. So let's go ahead and add a double star to that. And on top of that, I know we all love emojis here because isn't that cool? So let me give that a thumbs up. And let me just preview to make sure everything looks the way that I want it. OK, great. But it's not just about emojis and the fun stuff. You can also make at mentions if you want to include other team members to review this particular comment. Or you can reference bugs and other context that you might want to bring into this comment along the way. And when I've actually resolved all the issues here, I can mark it resolved so we all know when I've addressed these comments. And that sends also a notification off to the author who sent off that notification. But what social platform wouldn't be complete without likes? So I can also right-click on this, and I can add a like to this as well to make sure that Amanda knows that she's doing a really good job and a thumbs up on her work here.
We've actually heard from a lot of our developers internally at Microsoft that they want likes in code. So.
When we had we also have an extension that plugs into Visual Studio that brings GitHub development. And I remember when we worked on that with the GitHub team, the #1 ask that they had from us was to make sure that we had emoji support inside of Visual Studio so that you can plug in emoticons, because that is just how developers work nowadays. Let me take you a little bit more around what this extension has. You've seen the differences now. You're seeing the inline differences all happening here. Now, I still only am doing a lightweight review. But I have within Azure Repos another really cool nifty feature that you can do with their pull requests is this notion called updates, or internally we call it iterations. And I want to scroll up here to the top of the method here where Amanda put in that extra face that was missing, the hard eyes. Now you notice that there's been a couple extra changes that are in the pull request after she's made that original PR. Now I want to kind of rewind back and see how this kind of evolved. And so what I can do is I can use these updates, and I can roll back to the first update that Amanda made. And this is her original PR. So it's actually updating all my code in real time, giving me just the view of the changes that she's made. And then as I go through this, I can actually walk back and see exactly where that change was introduced and kind of cycle in and out of those updates to understand how this collaboration and how this discussion has evolved over the course of this pull request. Another really cool feature that is available through this extension is the rich code navigation that we have. And so I'm going to go over to the test case that Amanda edited. And I'm going to go over here, and as I'm reviewing the test case, I might want to actually take a look at the method that she wrote as well. Well, with the rich code navigation, we actually have a full index of this full repository here. And what that index allows me to do is it actually allows me to use features like peek. So I can right-click on this method here, and I can do a peek definition on this method. And in line, I'm getting a peek, semantic peek, and it's actually semantically looking up that code and bringing in that peek in here so I can see that method that she wrote earlier with sockib and refactor it into my code. But just to show you that that is a full index of the whole application, it isn't limited to just the changes that are in this particular code review. I added in another unit test here that actually is calling out to a different method that's not actually calling into a file that's part of this code review. So here, this toFriendly here, I'm going to go to definition on that. And when I go to definition on that, let's go right-click. Come on, we can do it.
Do you need to dismiss the...
Oh, yeah, let's try that and see if that helps. Oh, no. Oh, I was going to tell you that it was going off to another file. But we are getting, let's see, one more time. Try F12.
There you
Okay, there we go. F12 off to another file, but unfortunately not going across other files, at least not in this demo's breaking. But one other thing I can show you, and that is because we have a full index, I'm also getting all of my warnings and errors showing up inside of my error list as well as I go. And again, I haven't checked out this repository at all. I've just got the lightweight PR. If this is one of those more complicated PRs where I really need to dig into the code, I might want to debug it, set some breakpoints, and kind of really walk through the changes that are made, of course, there's also the checkout here. And that lets me pick the repository and the solution that I want. I can check that out. And now Visual Studio is checking out that branch and syncing me with that particular latest change in that PR. And then I can switch over to Solution Explorer, navigate, set breakpoints, and step through my code and navigate through it as if it was completely local.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I'm going to kind of keep you up here for a second because I want you to show them one more feature in just a minute. So what you guys just saw is that we now have integrated pull requests and code reviews inside of Visual Studio. So what this lets you do is inline diff viewing, so you can actually have complete code navigation, editing, debugging with that diff mode, within that diff mode. You can initiate or review pull requests inside of Visual Studio without having to switch windows or get into the web. And you obviously can also do social coding in terms of free-flowing comments with full expressivity that you would want to express for your code reviews. So that'll be a lot more fun. You guys probably heard a little bit earlier today, we've been showing you mostly Azure DevOps today, but also we have extensions and the same kind of support for GitHub. And so I showed you guys the Azure Active Directory SSO a little bit earlier. You can now use your GitHub credentials to sign into Azure Active Directory. So you can actually use your GitHub credentials to basically sign in. And then further, you can now sign in, that point was that you can actually use Azure Active Directory groups for your GitHub user ID management. And then this next point is that you can sign into Azure using your GitHub account. Now, there's one other thing that we've done is we've made it available so that you can get a reduced price for GitHub Enterprise with the Visual Studio subscription. So if you haven't checked that out, on the website, you can go check out visualstudio.com and you'll see that promotion there. So the next thing I want to do is show you guys a little bit about cloud productivity. What we're hearing from a lot of devs who are deploying to cloud applications is the old paradigms of debugging on your local machine no longer really work for the cloud. What you want to do in the cloud is you actually want to capture a trace in production and then be able to look at what was executing and diagnose it after the fact. So basically we call this production diagnostics. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Anthony. Are you ready yet?
Getting close.
Okay.
All right. Fingers crossed. So the next feature I want to show you is a preview feature.
7. There we go.
There we go. OK, great. Is a preview feature in Visual Studio 2019. It's still in development, but it's at that point where now you can actually try this as well. Fingers crossed, and we've made it. OK, cool. I sometimes like to describe to the debugger team that they are a strong but silent type. Oftentimes, it's always pulls through for you, but you often don't get a lot of feedback as you're going through. But no, they did pull through for me here. Great, which is awesome. But I want to talk a little about those kind of bugs that are most frustrating for me personally, the ones where you can't reproduce them locally, but they happen to repro for your customer or for another dev in the team. And so I have here the SeeingAI Deep Vision service that runs on the back end that the mobile app talks to for interrogating a number of different questions. And we have a very similar app to the one that Amanda showed you earlier. Excuse me, not an app, but a method that actually goes and checks some text input and compares to see if it's a positive face emoji, but also make sure that there's no neutral or negative emojis inside of that text. And there was a dev on our team that's been reporting saying that every time she puts a wink into the service, that the service reports it not as a positive emoji. And so I haven't been able to reproduce that locally every time I give it a wink. And so what I've asked her to do is to actually go ahead and reproduce that bug inside of one of our test environments. And she's gone and done that. And I have gone and attached what's called our snapshot debugger to that dev instance. And by attaching that snapshot debugger, I've put what's called a snap point. And a snap point inside of a running application actually takes a snapshot of the application. But what time travel debugging gives us is it actually gives us a full execution trace of the entire method where that snap point exists. Once that trace has been collected, I can actually navigate through that trace as if I was that customer seeing exactly the state of the application when they executed the code. So I have the trace already loaded here. It takes a few minutes to load a trace. These things can get quite big, and so I wanted to load it ahead of time while Amanda was talking. But once I've got the trace loaded, you can see here I'm sitting in a traditional debug window, and I can step through my code as you would as if I was sitting right in front of debugging my local inner loop experience. So let me go ahead and do some step overs here, and I can see that the code execution is moving through. If you look down below, you can see my debugger windows are all live and active, giving me the latest state of the application. And I can see the emoticons that she's passed here, and I see that wing showing up inside of it. I can even step into methods as I would, because not only am I getting a trace for the execution of the method where I set the snap point, but it also traces all the methods called from my method. So I can dig deep into it as well and understand all the code paths that come out of it. Once I step into it, I can also do other things. I can set a breakpoint here, so I can continue on past, and I can continue on to the breakpoint here. Oh, I had a breakpoint set randomly in the application. Well, there's another breakpoint there inside of my neutral application. I'm going to continue, though, one more time. And let's go ahead and keep continuing over there. And so now I've got the ability to move in forwards direction the same way as I would in my traditional inner loop development. But as I look at the application here, if I look at my, my locals windows here, I see that neutral faces here is true. And this method here is trying to test whether or not there are only positive faces but no neutrals and negatives. So this is getting me pretty close to where I think my problem is. Now I need to get back into that method. Now if this was a traditional debug session, I might have to detach my debugger, start the session all over again, replay the repro here. But instead, with a time travel trace, what I can actually do is I can do something called step back into. And what step back into does is it actually reverses execution of the session, of the trace, back into the bottom of the last method that was called. And so here I am into that contains neutral at the end of its execution. So I can continue to step backwards along the way if I'd like. Or the other thing that I can do is if you ever have a large loop that you're iterating over and you want to step across it, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll set a breakpoint at the other end of the loop and then run to that breakpoint and then continue on from there. Well, that same concept in time travel debugging works in the opposite direction. So I can set a breakpoint up here at the beginning of the method, and I can use something called reverse continue. And what reverse continue is going to do is it actually reverse the execution in time all the ways back, stepping over all the iterations of that loop as well, bringing me back to the very beginning. And so from here now, I can start to step forward again, and I can continue to step through the execution of my app step by step. Now what I want to do is I want to get forward here to when this particular neutral method is telling me that I am not hitting, or when it's coming back as true that it's finding a neutral face. And here I find that this particular face here is neutral. So let me go ahead and copy this and see what's going on. I copy the value, and I come over, I'm going to go over to a web browser. Let me bring up Edge. And I'll figure out what that particular emoji is, and if I paste it in, and look it up. OK, so it turns out that this is the smirking face, which looks just like the wink. OK, now I realize what's going on. It turns out that smirking face we've classified as a neutral face rather than a positive, but our dev said that she was using a wink. In fact, she was using smirking faces. And they look kind of similar, so I can see the differences between the two. But in fact, now we can go and figure out if we want to actually change smirking faces to be considered positive or consider updating our documentation and whatnot. So if you want to try this yourself, really what you need to do is first you need to have Visual Studio Enterprise. And you need to go and find where you want to attach to, and you set what's called a snap point. So I'm going to clear this here. And snap points are kind of distinguished from regular breakpoints with these little purple octagons that you see here. When you set a snap point, this little configuration here lets you set some additional settings here. Now, if you just set a snap point, you'll get a snapshot of your running application at that point in time. You can basically get a memory dump at that point in time. But when you go to Actions and you say Collect Time Travel Debugging, that will actually let you get the full execution trace of all the code that's executed in that particular method. Another really powerful tool about these snap points when you combine them with conditionals is you can actually put a conditional expression here and you can say, OK, if you were getting snap points for a running application, you'd be getting millions of requests. And you might get many, many different overlapping instances. You need to really zoom into the specific case that is failing for you. So perhaps I need to focus in on a particular client ID. And so I can add in another variable here and use the expression to say only when a particular client ID, come on, click, client ID, there we go, enter, is equal to, let's see, quote, Amanda S. And so now when I set that, I'm only going to see Amanda's results come through when that particular value is set to Amanda and my particular snap point is true. Very, very powerful stuff to be able to focus in and debug production level problems that you can't reproduce locally. If you guys want to give it a try, go to the debug menu, open up the attached snapshot debugger, check off enable time travel debugging, and let us know what you think.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. Cool. Well, so that was time travel debugging. So the last thing I just want to do is implore you guys to give us your feedback, not just on this session, which is obvious, but also on the product. There's a lot of different ways to give feedback. Mainly if you think about the upper right-hand corner, there's that little voice box there. If you click that, you can report a problem. You can capture a trace of Visual Studio. You can capture a snapshot, all different kinds of things to send us an issue. And we look at every single one of those that are sent into our team. And for the most part, our engineering team actually looks at them directly. So the other ways that you can actually send us feedback is obviously through surveys that are in the product, or via the dev community, or on Twitter. And we monitor all of those channels for your feedback, always trying to improve the product. We really appreciate the feedback that you send us. I will skip the story from Visual Studio 2019 development, but the bottom line is that we actually can respond to things, especially based on our agile developer practices at this point, fairly quickly. In this instance, customer reported an issue. We had discovered kind of what the issue was after just a couple of days, and actually released the issue within a month, released a fix for the issue within a month. The other thing that I'll call out is that we now are posting our roadmap about a quarter or two in advance of what we ship. So you guys can see all of the features that we're working on in Visual Studio completely transparently. And if there's something that's not on that list that you'd like to see on that list, let us know through one of those channels that I called out previously. Now, a lot of times I do the Future of Development talk in Visual Studio at Build. This year, I'm not doing that. We decided to showcase the SeeingAI application. But there is a talk tomorrow at 12:30 that a guy on my team, Jonathan Carter, will be doing that'll talk about a lot of new developer services that are coming out in preview that we announced earlier today. So I really encourage you guys to go check out this talk. We'll be talking about all of those features on the slide there. And if you guys want to check these things out, download Visual Studio 2019, tell us what you think, download the previews of what we had just talked about, and give us your feedback. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I'm sure you're hungry for dinner.